It's not very often you run across an expose like the one you are about to hear. The speaker is Will Canisi, and I'll leave a link to his new channel down in the description. I just spent over 2 hours on the phone with him, and I highly recommend you subscribe to his channel. What you are about to hear is a complete, concise, and chronological accounting of events in Trader 44's 8-year fake presidency, how the media was complicit in high treason with their cover-up, and ultimately how this constitutional republic was rescued from a techno-Nazi Fourth Reich dictatorship by the election of our beloved President, Donald Trump. While you may have seen other presentations with similar titles, this one stands alone in its professionalism. All the I's are dotted, all the T's are crossed. If you are unable to get past a bout of cognitive dissonance, if you're someone who cannot seem to find the point where you can rest in the sufficiency of the evidence, you need to watch this video until you understand. Evil doesn't require a motive. All it needs is an opportunity. These people are evil.
International order that we have worked for generations to build. Ordinary men and women are too small-minded to govern their own affairs. That order and progress can only come when individuals surrender their rights to an all-powerful sovereign.
Yes, you just heard what you thought you heard. Hello folks, this is the Will Canisi Show, in search for truth and justice with yours truly, Will Canisi. I want to wish everyone a very Merry Christmas, and the topic today is the 16-year plan that Obama and Clinton had to destroy America. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of what exactly this entailed. Well, Obama's first 8 years, he tried to take over the Federal Reserve. He wanted to have everyone on government health care. He put rogue operators in the government such as Comey, McCabe, Brennan, Clapper, Lynch. He had more people out of work in the history of our country to create poverty. He had illegals coming in voting, and then he needed to create a scare by funding terrorism abroad and domestic terrorism. And finally, his ultimate goal, and a lot of people say, well, you know, he wasn't doing this. His ultimate goal was to declare martial law and suspend the 2016 election. And I normally don't do this in my introductions. However, I want to play you this clip of Sean Hannity talking about the executive order that Obama signed, which ultimately would lead to martial law.
And tonight, the betting of the president continues as we bring you another edition of The Real Obama. Now, in this installment, we shine the spotlight on an executive order that the White House was hoping that you would never learn about. Now, the president signed the National Defense Resources Preparedness Executive Order late Friday afternoon. And since that time, now the measure has been virtually ignored by the mainstream media. Now, the order essentially gives the president of the United States absolute power over any and all American resources during both times of peace and national crisis. Now, this includes, but is not limited to, food and livestock, water, plants, energy, health resources, transportation, and construction materials, and gives the government the ability to, quote, control the general distribution of any material, including applicable services, in the civilian market. Now, not everybody's laughing about this executive order. In fact, some have suggested this would give the president of the United States the authority to declare basically martial law during times of peace. And to be sure, this is simply the latest string of actions taken by the administration that ignore the basic principles of our Constitution.
And I have plenty of proof for all of that. Once he was done, when Clinton came in, she was supposed to pick up where he left off, start war either over in Iran or North Korea, take away your First and Second Amendment rights, close military bases, censor the news, continue opening the border, remove the Electoral College so California and New York could elect their president, and end military funding. So it's going to be a stack-packed house today, so stay tuned because we have a lot to cover.
You together as one.
There are 8 basic aspects. If you can control these aspects, you can control a population. The first one would be healthcare. Get everyone on some type of free healthcare, government healthcare. Poverty would be the next. So therefore, the poor are less likely to fight back. Create more debt. Therefore, you can create more taxes, which creates more poverty. Gun control. If you take guns away from a population, you control the population. Get everyone on welfare for food, housing, and income. Education. Take control of education like our Common Core today, and remove religion and the belief of God from the people and government. And finally, have class warfare, the wealthy against the impoverished or the poor, and you divide the people you can control. So as I'm going through discussing what Obama has actually done to take down America, I will be bringing those aspects in and giving you examples. So if it caught you off guard when you first came onto the program, I'm going to play that clip for you again. And basically, Obama is pushing the New World Order, saying that we are too small-minded to handle our own affairs.
International order that we have worked for generations to build. Ordinary men and women are too small-minded to govern their own affairs. That order and progress can only come when individuals surrender their rights to an all-powerful sovereign.
So Obama thinks that the average person is too small-minded to handle their own affairs, and they need to surrender their individual rights to an all-power sovereign. Well, whether or not people wanted to do that, he made every grand attempt to carry that out while he was president. So one of the very first things that he did when he came in office, he tried to take over the Fed. That's the Federal Reserve. And basically, that would mean that all the banks would officially be run by the government. Now, the Fed is a private entity supported but not run by the government. Everybody thinks the government has control of the Fed, but that's not the case. However, you can think Joe Biden in the fall of 2016, when he tried to do that a second time, take over the Fed, he stood in his way. Now, if the government would have taken over the Fed, just so you'll know, they literally could charge negative interest. And that's exactly what Obama was planning to do. In other words, if you had your money in the bank, they would actually not give you interest. They would charge you interest to keep your money in the bank, to take the money out of your pocket. Because one of the ways to take over a citizens or a body of people is keep them in poverty. And Obama was trying to figure every way he could to nickel and dime and take money out of people's pockets. So that was the first attempt, was in 2009, was to take over the Federal Reserve. Now, we also tried to take away guns. Now, when you have gun control, which is another way to control a population, people can't defend themselves. You're stuck. Whatever the government comes along and says, you have to do. Now, the one good example of guns being confiscated was back during World War II in Austria. The Nazis made a deal with Austria to come in, and they took the country of Austria without firing a shot. Not long after they had gotten into Austria, they started making everyone go register their guns. After they made folks register their guns, and they started coming around knocking on their door and asking people to give up their guns. Okay. Well, they also had taken and put people on vouchers because they were hoarding food, and they were divvying it out because it was a war going on. And if you didn't turn your guns in, they take your food vouchers away so you couldn't eat. And then if that still didn't work, then they throw you in jail. Well, over in England and Australia, they don't have guns over there either. They are socialist countries. And pretty much there was a gun registration, then a gun confiscation. So this is what happens when governments come along and start asking, we're taking away your rights to keep and bear arms, our Second Amendment right. And they get started first with, they want to limit the type of gun and the type of ammunition, how much ammunition you have. Then they come along and want you to register, have a national registry or state registry. Then they come around and start knocking on your door. And right now we're going through a big thing in Virginia because they're trying to do just that. And I'll just say, they come knocking on my door, they will get my guns, but it will be out of my warm, dead hands with the barrel still smoking. So anyway, getting back to Obama. Well, he tried 3 times to have some type of gun control legislation, and it was shot down. He even signed an executive order to limit guns. And when he did it, there are videos out there, he's standing there, he's crying, he's got the children around because children are going to get shot and killed with guns because guns are so bad. And that's exactly the same thing Hitler did. He sat around a table, had all these children around when he signed his order to confiscate guns. He used the children. Same playbook, same exact playbooks. Just keep that in mind. And basically, Obama was wanting to disarm the people because he had some further ideas that we'll talk about in just a while. So since he couldn't get our legislators to pass gun control laws and his bogus executive order didn't work because the feds wouldn't enforce it, number one, and number two, eventually the Supreme Court said it was unconstitutional, he signed another gun law, except it was the United Nations Arms Treaty, which allowed the United Nations to dictate gun laws in countries throughout the world, including the United States. And on camera, Trump actually signed a executive order getting rid of the United Nations Arms Treaty, because technically it was called the end of Operation Choke Point, because number one, United Nations had the ability to come into the United States and dictate gun laws with that. Also, it allowed for banks to not make loans or allow people to purchase guns with credit cards. That was called Operation Choke Point, and Trump signed an executive order and got rid of it because he is a Second Amendment president. Now, this is Trump making an announcement as he signs the law or executive order to get rid of the United Nations Arms Treaty and Operation Choke Point.
American citizens live by American laws, not the laws of foreign countries. Thank you. I'm proud to announce another historic step to protect your Second Amendment rights. And I didn't tell Chris and Wayne and Oliver, I didn't even tell them about it. So they're listening in this big room someplace and they're saying, I wonder what he's going to do. The good thing with me, you never know. Never know. So in the last administration, President Obama signed the UN Arms Trade Treaty. The United Nations will soon receive a formal notice that America is rejecting this treaty. And we have shut down the previous administration's massive abuse of power, known as Operation Choke Point. Under this ill-advised program, government bureaucrats discouraged banks from making loans to gun retailers. A backdoor attack on private gun ownership that will never be allowed to happen on my watch. That's step one, folks. Step one, you know what step 2, 3, and 4 is? Step 4 is you don't have guns. You don't have any way to protect yourself. That's why we're making trade deals that are so good for our country. So in the last administration, President Obama signed the UN Arms Trade Treaty. And in his waning days in office, he sent the treaty to the Senate to begin the ratification process. This treaty threatened your subjugate, and you know exactly what's going on here, your rights and your constitutional and international rules and restrictions and regulations. Under my administration, we will never surrender American sovereignty to anyone. We will never allow foreign bureaucrats to trample on your Second Amendment freedom. And that is why my administration will never ratify the UN Arms Trade Treaty. I hope.
The next thing Obama had to do was create a scare through terrorists, domestic and international. The international terrorist that he created was ISIS. And then you have those splinter arms, Hezbollah and Al-Qaeda and so forth, but he and Clinton created ISIS. So to do that, they had to take Gaddafi out. So they take military weapons and equipment, fund the quote-unquote rebels in Libya, and the Libyan rebels, which ended up being terrorists later, took out Gaddafi. Well, why was that? Because that was their staging point for bringing military weapons in and shipping them over to Syria to arm, as Obama called it, the rebels, which ended up being ISIS. And the reason why we had Benghazi was because the ambassador in Benghazi, Chris Stevens, was starting to get cold feet on their plan, and they had to get him out. And they started planning the Benghazi attack. Obama and Clinton started planning the Benghazi attack a year in advance. Now, there are actual state documents out there that Judicial Watch has found that states that Benghazi was planned at least 10 days in advance, but I know for a fact it was way longer than that. And when Benghazi, the 13 hours of the assault was taking place, we have an expeditionary force in Italy, that covers the Mediterranean. They could have been in Benghazi in 2 hours, and they were told to stand down because Obama needed somewhere to stage his weapons to get them up to the rebels, which ended up being ISIS, to create the ISIS scare. So here's Tom Fenton, the president of Judicial Watch, who, with a FOIA request, sued for documents on the ISIS and the military equipment being shipped from Benghazi to Syria, and that Obama administration knew ISIS was forming months ahead of time and did nothing about it.
And one of the key aspects, one of the key documents that we uncovered, and I think it's arguably the most important thing we've ever found, are documents showing, and this is the headline, Judicial Watch, Defense State Department documents reveal Obama administration knew that Al-Qaeda terrorists had planned Benghazi attack 10 days in advance. The funny thing is, that's not even the most important part of it. This is the most important part. Well, I guess we can argue about what's more important, but we couldn't write enough headlines on these documents. Administration knew, Obama, 3 months before the November 2012 presidential election, of ISIS plans to establish a caliphate in Iraq. Administration knew of arms being shipped from Benghazi to Syria. Okay. They knew and were supporting terrorist movements in Syria opposed to the Assad regime. And we knew arms were being shipped out of Benghazi to support that. And we knew it in such a way that almost certainly, if we that suggests one of two things: that we were doing it, or we could have stopped it.
Now here's Tom Fenton giving an actual rundown of the actual weapons that was shipped to Syria and the actual ports they left from and arrived to.
So the documents show, let me talk about the movement of arms from Benghazi to Libya. From Benghazi to Syria. That's a conspiracy theory, folks. Well, it's a conspiracy theory based on a government document that says, weapons from the former Libya, this is a DIA document, Department of Defense Intelligence Agency. By the way, the DIA at the time was being run by General Flynn, and methinks it's because of documents like this that the Obama gang hated him and wanted to put him in jail. Weapons from the former Libya military stockpiles were shipped from the port of Benghazi, Libya, to the port of Banias and the port of Borja Islam, Syria. The weapons shipped during late August 2012 were sniper rifles, RPGs, and 125 millimeter and 155 millimeter howitzer missiles. During the immediate aftermath of and following the uncertainty caused by the downfall of the Gaddafi regime in October 2011, which of course was precipitated by American military might under Barack Obama, which of course caused the murder of Gaddafi, and up until early September 2012, weapons from the former Libya military stockpiles located in Benghazi, Libya, were shipped from the port of Benghazi, Libya. Of course, I've already read that part. The Syrian ports were chosen due to the small amounts of cargo transiting these two ports. The ships used to transport the weapons were medium-sized and able to hold 10 or less shipping cargo containers or cargo. The DIA document further details the weapons shipped from Syria during late August. The numbers for each weapon were estimated to be 500 sniper rifles, 100 RPG launchers with 300 total rounds, and approximately 400 howitzer missiles, 200 each of 125 millimeters and 200 each of 155 millimeter. Okay, guys, if you think the DIA had access to that level of detail without also information about who was doing it in a way that could have been stopped, and of course the cagey about who was doing it. It's a passive voice. So we knew Benghazi was, and we're in a position to stop. I mean, if you know the actual numbers to the size of what weapons are being shipped out, the type of ships being used, it seems to me you're in a position to stop it. Or maybe you were involved in it yourself. So there you go. Obama and Hillary Clinton participated in the overthrow of the Gaddafi regime, leading to the murder of Gaddafi, in-rushed the terrorists that turned Libya into a plaything for them. Out of that was, with our knowledge, sent arms to Syria to fund the terrorists who were attacking and trying to overthrow the Assad regime.
Now, why did he want to create an ISIS scare? Well, late one evening on a Friday, somewhere close to Christmas, where we had a massive snowstorm on the East Coast, a bill was introduced into Congress giving Obama, let me say this again, later in the evening during a snowstorm, there was a bill to give Obama full control over the military and for him to be able to declare war without congressional approval, not only across anywhere in the world, but and or in the United States. And this was a direct violation of the Constitution. Now, this is Senator Chris Murphy. He's a Democrat from Connecticut, and he's given the rundown on Obama trying to get more war powers and bypass Congress.
Madam President, today I wanted to come down to the floor to speak very briefly about a resolution that the majority leader introduced, I believe, earlier today. This is an authorization for military force resolution that apparently purports to give the president legal authority to conduct military operations against ISIS. Before we break for the weekend, Madam President, I thought it was important to come to the floor to explain why, very briefly, to my colleagues, to explain what this resolution really is. This resolution is a total rewrite of the War Powers Clause of the United States Constitution. Let's be clear about that. It is essentially a declaration of international martial law, a sweeping transfer of military power to the president that will allow him or her to send U.S. troops almost anywhere in the world for almost any reason with absolutely no limitations.
But he had created this international terrorist organization, ISIS, to be able to do that, because that was part of his grandiose plan. So what did he do on the domestic side? He was, number one, helping create, with George Soros, Antifa, a domestic terrorist organization. Hasn't been dubbed a domestic terrorist organization, but you get the point. And he was working with two Islamic organizations, CARE and a Islamic State of the U.S. I forget the name of the group. Is two of them. They were working with them, funding them, and they have direct ties to the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, with these quote-unquote domestic terrorist groups in the United States, they create these problems, then they want to come along and solve your problems or protect you for your best interest. But when they do that, they want to increase their power or take away some of your rights. Well, there was a law that Obama tried to get passed. It was called prolonged detention. And before she got bought and paid for, Rachel Maddow actually did a very nice report on this, and I have the link down in the description.
Announcing a radical new claim of presidential power that is not afforded by the Constitution and that has never been attempted in American history, even by George W. Bush and Dick Cheney. Remarkably, President Obama today made both of those speeches simultaneously. Standing inside the National Archives in front of the actual original Constitution, President Obama delivered a blistering critique of the Bush administration, in which he called their actions and their legacy literally a mess.
Our government made a series of hasty decisions. Poorly planned, haphazard approach. Too often, we set those principles aside as luxuries that we could no longer afford. Our government made decisions based on fear rather than foresight. The decisions that were made over the last 8 years established an ad hoc legal approach for fighting terrorism that was neither effective nor sustainable.
An ad hoc legal approach for fighting terrorism that was neither effective nor sustainable. Ouch. Then, moments later, he announced his own ad hoc legal approach for fighting terrorism. President Obama today proposed something new, something called prolonged detention. Doesn't sound that bad, right? Prolonged detention. Did you ever see the movie Minority Report? It was based on a Philip K. Dick short story. Came out in 2002. It starred Tom Cruise, remember? He played a police officer in something called the Department of Pre-Crime. Pre-crime is where people are arrested and incarcerated to prevent crimes that they have not yet committed.
Mr. Marks, by mandate of the District of Columbia Pre-Crime Division, I'm placing you under arrest for the future murder of Sarah Marks and Donald Dubin that was take place today, April 22nd, at 0800 hours 4 minutes.
No, I didn't do anything.
You didn't do anything, but you're gonna. Future murder. Creepy, right? Putting somebody in jail not for what they've done, but for what you're very sure they're going to do?
there may be a number of people who cannot be prosecuted for past crimes. In some cases because evidence may be tainted, but who nonetheless pose a threat to the security of the United States.
We're not prosecuting them for past crimes, but we need to keep them in prison because of our expectation of their future crimes. To hear President Obama claim the power to keep people in prison indefinitely with no charges against them, no conviction, no sentence, just imprisonment. It's particularly stunning to hear him make that claim in the middle of a speech that was all about the rule of law.
What he wanted to do was to be able to indefinitely detain people because of a crime that they may commit in the future. So let me say that again. By reconstructing the system of law, he wanted to justify detention camps in the United States and have the legal ability to detain people if he thought they were going to commit a law sometime in the future. Now, did you see this in a movie? Yeah, Tom Cruise made a movie that did exactly that. He was a law enforcement officer. He went around and arrested people for crimes they had not been committed yet. And ultimately, they ended up chasing him down in the movie because somewhere along the line, he was supposed to commit some crime. So, yes, Obama was trying to set the stage to be able to lawfully go and just arrest folks that he didn't like, basically. Okay, now, he used the fact that, oh, well, we have Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and we have people down there, and we've have them detained, and they're terrorists, and we've had them for all these years. We need to enact that law to bring it on, and because those folks were arrested outside the continental United States. Oh, we need to have that same law for inside the continental United States because we got all these bad people out here that it's being discovered now that Obama is the one that was propping all these bad domestic terrorism up. Now, the next thing he did was he depleted the military, and big time. Now, the article that I have says he, over 5 years, had gotten rid of, fired, or dismissed 197 ranking military officers. The actual number was up to 240 or 260. And he's getting all these high-ranking military officers out because he knew that with those folks in their positions, he would never, ever be able to pull off what he was trying to pull off. And it's just like the Night of the Long Knives with Hitler to a certain degree, except Hitler went around in one night and killed 300 people. A lot of people that were very loyal to him, but he viewed them as a threat, so therefore he got rid of them. And the next day he put himself as the Fuhrer, the head leader of Germany. Okay. Now, the other thing Obama did to deplete the military was he started closing military bases all over the United States. And not only did he not close military bases in the United States, he closed 15 in Europe alone. So he's closing military bases all over the world. And our military was so depleted when Trump came in that one of the generals actually told Trump, Obama left us in a really bad mess. We actually do not have the bullets to fight a war at this point in time. Okay? Since so many of our factories had closed up, we didn't have the parts to put on our airplanes. They were going out to the graveyard, airplane graveyard, I believe it's in Arizona, and they were scavenging parts off of airplanes to put on airplanes that were there but weren't running because we didn't have the parts, or we'd have to wait for the parts to be made over in China and have those parts shipped in to repair our airplanes. I mean, that's how bad our military was. And if you don't think our military didn't need some money, the Trump just signed the third bill. The 3 economic stimulus packages he has signed, he has had over $700 billion in each one of those packages for the military. That's $2 trillion in the course of 3 years that he has dumped into our military. That's how depleted our military was. And that's how bad Obama left our military, because he wanted it to the point where we got that we could not defend ourselves, and then we would have to succumb to and bow down to all these whatever nation or nations that were giving us a hard time. For example, when the Iranians took those sailors on the boat out off the coast of Iran and held our sailors at gunpoint, and Obama did nothing. Absolutely nothing. So another thing that he did was he allowed classified military and other information to go to the Chinese and to the Russians. He allowed the Chinese to hack into U.S. databases, and they got over 22 million profiles of American citizens, and 5.6 million of those American citizen profiles had their fingerprints on it. So if you don't think that wasn't compromising our citizens of our United States by the Chinese by allowing that to happen. But they didn't stop there, because with Hillary Clinton's illegal email server that she had, that supposedly Obama didn't know anything about, which we know that's not true, there was a program that was in that computer that for every email that came through, it went out to a second computer. And guess what? Every time that information went out to that second computer, which was to the Russians and to the Chinese, guess whose foundation got a couple $100 million? Yeah, the Clintons, to pay for play comes in. They were selling our military secrets for hundreds of millions of dollars through her illegal server. That was the purpose of it being there. They needed to figure out a way to bump up and have a ton of money to be able to fund all their ill-gotten gains, and this was an illegal way for them to do that. Then Obama goes over and makes this Iranian nuclear deal, where he gave $1.8 billion of actual cash money that was loaded up into military transports and took it over and gave a terrorist nation $1.8 billion of your tax dollars. He also cut the sanctions and freed up $150 billion more dollars for the Iranians, a terrorist country. Now, this took place in Obama's first term. John Kerry was his Secretary of State. John Kerry was interviewed on television and came out and actually admitted that he suspected that some of that $1.8 million was going to go and fund terrorists. So let me say that again. Obama makes this nuclear deal with the Iranians. And I will tell you the reason why he made the nuclear deal and where they got their uranium to make their nuclear weapons in just a second. He makes this Iranian nuclear deal, and that was the guys to not only free up $150 billion of their dollars, but to give $1.8 billion of your tax money in actual cash to a terrorist nation, which they already knew was going to go towards and fund terrorists. So when John Kerry, Secretary of State, was asked about the $1.8 billion of cash that we sent over to Iran, did he think any of this would land in the hands of terrorists? And this is what he said from his own words, folks.
But just to put a fine point on it, do you believe that any of that $55 billion ends up in the hands of terrorists?
I think that some of it will end up in the hands of the IRGC or of other entities, some of which are labeled terrorist. To some degree, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that every component of that can be prevented, but I can tell you this. Right now, we are not seeing the early delivery of funds going to that kind of endeavor at this point in time. I'm sure at some point some of it will.
You think somebody has committed a little treason here? Now that brings us to Uranium One deal. Now I could do a whole podcast on this, but I'm going to try to keep it as simple as possible. The Uranium One deal was 20% of the uranium stockpile of the United States was sold by the United States through Canada to the Russians. So here's Tucker Carlson speaking on the Uranium One deal.
Well, the press has spent months searching for a Russia scandal, but in an odd twist, the scandal could be one they've had all along, or for a number of years anyway. 2010, the Obama administration approved a deal giving a Russian firm control over 20% of the American uranium reserves. It wasn't very widely noted at the time. It's turned out to be a big deal. President Trump today blasted the press for ignoring what he says is the real scandal. Watch.
If the mainstream media would cover the uranium scandal and that Russia has 20% of our uranium, for whatever reason, and a lot of people understand what those reasons may be, I think that's your Russia story. That's your real Russia story, not a story where they talk about collusion and there was none. It was a hoax. The problem is that the mainstream media does not want to cover that story because that affects people that they protect. And it's a disgrace that the fake news won't cover it.
And when that happened, guess whose foundation got another little couple $100 million? Yeah, the Clinton Foundation. So there's some folks out there say, well, there's no way that you can do that and transport it because it's too volatile and so forth. So let me explain to you what yellow cake uranium is. When you mine uranium, you put it in a powder form, and it has uranium when it comes out in its original form is 238 molecules. It's called uranium-238. It's stable at that point. When you have yellow cake 238 uranium, you can transport it anywhere. You don't need anything. You don't need to have any type of special transport. You can throw it in the back of a truck or the back of a car and transport it. Only when you destabilize uranium and make it uranium-235, you take 3 molecules out and you make the total molecule to an odd number, the uranium starts to shake. When that happens, it creates heat. That's where you need the special facilities to house it. That's when it becomes nuclear. That's why you have to have heavy water. Heavy water is 1 molecule out of about every 10,000. It's like H2O2, okay? H2O with 1 molecule of oxygen. I'm not a scientist, so I'm not exactly 100% on the H2O2, but you get the point. Regular water boils at 212 degrees. Heavy water boils at 215 degrees, okay? So that extra 3 degrees is what you need to keep uranium cool so it doesn't melt down. So you hear years ago we had a nuclear reactor up in Rhode Island melt down. Well, they lost their heavy water and the uranium overheated and it melted. So that's what you have. Well, when they were transporting this yellow cake uranium, you don't need all that. Like I said, you can put it in the back of a car. You can put it in a cooler if you want. All right. Now, I don't have the resource here, but I will tell you, guess who delivered the original sample on the purchase? None other than Bob Mueller. That's right. Bob Mueller is the one who delivered that. And there's an organization called CFIUS.
And we have a CFIUS process. That process has to happen anytime a company is going to acquire a company that might impact our national security.
Exactly.
Most countries don't have that process. It's good that we have that process that helps us protect our national security. This deal went through that process. It's a really complex process. 12 agencies of the U.S. government are involved. 9 agency heads make the final decision. Secretary Clinton, Secretary of State at the time, was one of 9 who approved of that decision. I believe that was a bad policy decision back then, but that was 2010. Right now, it's quite different. The situation with Russia is much more extreme, and Russia poses a much more significant threat to our security.
That may or may not be true, but for the sake of the debate, I will concede your point and say that Russia is a greater threat than in the past. I don't believe that, but I know that you do. Given that, how horrifying must it be for you to read what's happened to that uranium that the Obama administration allowed the Russians to control? You have in the New York Times a Wyoming landowner on whose land some of these uranium deposits sits saying, I'm watching trucks come into my property, routinely pack uranium into drums, and truck off to a processing plant abroad. Uranium One, this company has no export license to take that uranium out of this country. It's winding up off this continent. You know exactly where it's going, to places that are dangerous to the United States. And that's all because the Obama administration, with Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State, allowed this to happen. Why?
So if you don't think this was a conspiracy to get our uranium out and to fund terrorist countries by Russia brokering it, just hear me out. CFIUS is an organization that is set up to approve or deny business transactions that may be conducive against the United States. So if it's a business transaction, it's going to put the United States at some type of peril. They won't approve it. Well, who are the people who approve it? It's 9 people on the president's cabinet. His 9 of his main cabinet members have to sign off on a CFIUS to approve. So not only did Obama approve it, but so did everyone in his cabinet approve the sale of our uranium. And what they did was they gave it to this trucking company up in Maryland. They took it up to Canada, to Rostefan, I think it is the name, Rosta something. It's a Russian name, and then that's how it got over to Russia. Then Russia disseminated that yellow cake uranium to 2 countries, North Korea and to Iran, because that falls into Clinton's part of getting us into a war with those 2 countries when she was supposedly to get elected. So the Iranians did not have, let me say that again, the Iranians did not have nuclear weapons until after the Uranium One deal was done. Same thing with North Korea. Their nuclear weapons were very limited, but now all of a sudden they have all these nuclear weapons after the Uranium One deal was done, and they were in bed with the Russians, and we basically funded not 1 but 2 terrorist countries. One a terrorist country, the other one a communist country, and gave them their nuclear weapons. You can thank Obama for that. So just a few short years later, I don't have the link, but it's out there, Bibi Netanyahu came out on television. And if you don't know who Bibi Netanyahu is, he's the Prime Minister of Israel. And the Israeli Mossad had been busy over in Iran copying and sneaking out all of their plans that they have for nuclear weapons. And it was a ton. They had stuff stacked up in this bookshelf on television that was 8 feet high, and CDs and DVDs up to wazoo, laying out Iran's nuclear plans and nuclear weapon capability. And all this happened after Uranium One was taking place. So what's some of the other things that Obama tried to do? Well, he attempted to censor and ban Fox News. Now, why would he do that? Why didn't he go after MSNBC and CNN and all these others? Well, Fox News is basically tells the truth. They don't get out and tell lies. And if you have been a listener of MSNBC and CNN, it just tell you that for 3 years they've been out there spewing about Trump collusion and Trump collaborating with the Russians, and we found out from the Mueller report that that wasn't the case. Okay, so Fox News from day one, they don't always get it right 100% of the time or tell everything that you want to hear, but they are 90% on telling the truth and not hiding information. Let's just say that way. There's some information out there that they could be reporting on, but they're not. But I understand that, and that's how it gets started. You take and you ban one, then they can start going down the line, or they could say, "You see what we did to Fox News? You're going to straighten up, and you're going to say what we want you to say, and you're not going to report certain things, because if you do, then we'll come after you." That's how they work. The NSA was caught spying on Americans. Now, they set this up, and then they allowed it to get leaked about the National Security Agency spying on Americans, millions of Americans. They did that because they wanted to weaken the NSA, because they knew that they were good people in the NSA. They knew that they were the intelligence gatherers on the domestic side of the U.S., and they knew that there would be people in the NSA coming out and telling what they were up to, because this is all leading up to something in the fall of 2016. Okay, so you start putting some of the pieces together. Now they also wanted to stack up the Supreme Court. Well, one of the biggest opponents that they had was Justice Scalia, and all of a sudden he was found dead in his place down in Texas. Well, if you remember a little conversation that took place out in Las Vegas on an airplane with Slick Willie and with Loretta Lynch, the Attorney General, basically that conversation was, if you don't prosecute Crooked Hillary for her emails, once she gets elected, we will put you in Scalia's spot on the Supreme Court. So once again, they were bothering the Supreme Court, but they had to get the position out of the way first. And it's mighty funny that they never did an autopsy on Justice Scalia. So just think about all these things. He also did not enforce voter laws. Now there's 3,000 jurisdictions that you can go vote in the United States. 2,500 of those jurisdictions either had dead voters voting or people who had moved out. And I'll give you one example, and this is, you go to Judicial Watch's website. They have the story on this because they're the ones who discovered it, and they're the ones who helped get it taken care of. They found 2 million voters on the California registries that were either dead or had moved out of the state. So you wonder how all these people over in California that's now sitting up in the Congress, and a lot of them are trying to impeach Trump, been getting elected every 2 years. And out of those 2 million, 1 million of those people were in Los Angeles alone. And it wasn't quite that bad throughout these other jurisdictions, but there were several other jurisdictions that were in the hundreds of thousands and tens of thousands of either dead voters or people who had moved. Well, Obama also, on the voting issue, the reason why he wanted to have open borders and allow the illegals in was for votes, because he was putting them on welfare, allowing them to cross the border. Now, when you have these illegals coming in, number one, we're spending $100 billion plus a year for illegals. And that's to take care of them, for the schools and the resources in our country that's being taken away from American citizens, medical bills because they don't pay medical bills, and welfare. So while you're taking them and you're giving them, not making them pay for their medical, because you can bill them, but you can't find them, you can't track them down. They don't exist. You allow them to vote, you allow them to go to our schools, which takes away from our children while they're riding up and down the road. And we're talking over 20 million people here riding up and down our roads using our resources once again. It slowly drains and wears down on your infrastructure. Another thing Obama did was he went after his competitors, conservatives. Now, back then it was the Tea Party. So what did he do to go after them? He used the IRS. Yeah. He had millions of people audited by the IRS. I can't find the video, but I'd seen it a couple years ago and had posted it on my Facebook timeline. And Facebook has a habit of taking things off they don't like. Okay. And it was a documentary of this one family where they were outspoken on a political end. Next thing you know, the IRS comes in. They arrested the parents, both of them. The parents lost their jobs. They put liens against their houses. They lost their cars. Totally ruined these people's lives. That's the kind of person you're dealing with. This is the same kind of thing that Adolf Hitler would do. Same thing that Joseph Stalin did, and a lot of your dictators throughout the world from history past. And if you don't study history, you're destined to repeat it or see it repeated. So now, there was no jobs. Okay? 95 million Americans were out of the labor force when Obama was president. 95 million people. There was only 320 million people. That's about 25% of the people in the country out of a job. So why is that significant? Well, if you have people out of jobs, then they relied on government food stamps and welfare. And we'll get to that in a minute. Well, let's get back to the Obamacare for a second, because with the Obamacare, number one, there's a rule in there that just got taken out of, thanks to Trump, that you did not have Obamacare, they would fine you. Basically on your taxes. They fined you on your taxes. I just did my taxes for next year, and it's the first time in several years I didn't have to pay a fine because I'm not going to have Obamacare. Now, they also created more of a impoverished situation because businesses were required to offer Obamacare, health insurance. So what do small businesses do? They start putting everybody part-time, 35 hours a week. So people are getting paid less money. So once again, they're creating a little bit more of a poverty situation. Now, when you had people on Obamacare, what else did they do? Once they realized that they had gotten as far as they could, and people were starting to balk at it, they started going up on the premiums. Yep. And not only did they go up on the premiums, but they also went up on the deductibles and copays. And I've seen some Obamacare programs, deductibles was $15,000, folks. And the premiums were $800 a month. So if you start doing the math, you're paying out $9,000, $10,000 a year just for the premiums. Then you have a $15,000 deductible. Then you have copays. Okay, before it pays anything, you have to have a medical bill of over $30,000 before it starts paying. So let me go back to when a government gives you health care or gets you relied on their health care, or they get you on food stamps, or they supplement your income. Okay. And that comes down to the next thing, because we had 13 million people on food stamps when Obama was president. 13 million. And they tried this, and I forget which state it was, that if you own a gun, you can't be on food stamps. They tried, it didn't work. Then they said, okay, well, if you do drugs, you can't be on food stamps. Then they came along and said, social services, if you have children that are foster kids, you can't have guns in your house. What you need to understand is when they give you something and you get relied on it, they can then come along and dictate to you what you want to think, what you want to do, what you want to say. Now, England is a socialist country, and they control all the utilities over there along other things. And the royal family over in England does a very good job of keeping things quiet of what is actually going on over in England. Okay. They got news media and the government, parliament, pretty much in their back pocket up until recently. I think things are going to change, but up until now. And I was talking with a gentleman who was very outspoken about some issues. I'm not going to say his name or what he was talking about. And he was slamming the royal family. Well, they came along and he was on an income supplement. In socialist countries, they do that. They will supplement your income to a certain degree. He was on some type of income supplement. They told him to shut his mouth. He didn't. They took away his income supplement. Oh, yeah. Took it away. Well, they still didn't shut him up. So he went to get on the internet one day and they shut his internet off. Well, he lived in a little cottage right outside of his town or where he lived. So he went a couple miles down the road to his buddy's house and kept on because he wasn't going to shut him up. And I had to respect the guy for that. He comes back, they had shut his electricity off. Now, he had a backup generator because he was off the grid there a little bit and they had been having trouble with their electricity at time to time. So he had that. Still didn't shut him up. So while I don't get my buddy in trouble, he goes down to a internet cafe, kept on. Next thing you know, he comes on internet cafe one evening and they were standing there waiting to arrest him, and they arrested him and put him in jail because they didn't like what he had to say. See, when they give you something and they get you relied on medical, health care, food stamps, supplements, they will then want to tell you this is what you can do, this is what you can say, or we're going to take things away from you, things that you need. And that's exactly what Obama was trying to do, was getting, 95 million people out of work, 13 million people on food stamps. It was 43 million people living on the poverty line when he was president. And if you keep people that's another thing when you control a population. You keep people poor, they can't fight back. They won't fight back as much. They don't have the resources, and they're probably working 2 or 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. So another thing to do that you want to control a population is, I'd mentioned before, is debt. Because the more debt that you have, you can justify having more taxes, which creates more poverty. And Trump wanted to, he cut the taxes. Well, that's the reason why the Democrats, and that's why there's so much fight on cutting taxes. And when you have poverty, you create class warfare. Basically, you have the rich against the poor, and you've now divided the people. Well, if you can divide, you can conquer. I'll give you a prime example of that. You've all heard of the Alamo, where the Texans and Davy Crockett went in with the Tennesseans, 100 and less than 200, sit there at the Alamo Fort and held off Santa Anna's Mexican army of several thousand. And finally they lost. Well, what you don't hear after that was General Sam Houston. He was leading the Texas Army. And after the Alamo, General Sam Houston started breaking camp and heading away from Santa Anna. Santa Anna started chasing him. And he had taken a play out of Napoleon Bonaparte's book, The French General, and he needed to wait until Santa Anna divided his army. And after a couple weeks of running, that's exactly what happened. Santa Anna divided his army. He had a small group coming up and chasing him, which Santa Anna was in with all of his generals, and then he had a good part of his group hook around and try to outflank Sam Houston. Soon as that happened, Sam Houston stopped, turned right around, and went straight at Santa Anna's group with all of his generals and took them in 15 minutes and defeated Santa Anna, told him, don't ever come back across the Rio Grande again. You divide, you can conquer. So when you divide people and you get them back and forth, and they're fighting each other, and they're not paying attention to what you're doing. You divide, you can conquer. Then education. Well, Obama pushed Common Core. And I have 6 kids. I've sat down and helped with many lessons over the years. And they pump so much knowledge at these kids, and they try to memorize, but they don't learn anything. Then they come out of school and they've had all this knowledge pumped in their head that hadn't forgot anything, but they don't teach them some of the basics. Like going to a bank and opening up a bank account, and how to handle credit cards, and getting insurance for your car and for your home, and health insurance, how to act when you get pulled over by the police, basic medical life support to save someone, to patch up a wound or something. They don't teach that. They don't teach about getting your car registered, getting your driver's license squared away, loans, about credit and how to stay. They don't teach none of this stuff. None of these things that you do every day that is important, because they're jamming so much information that the kids come out and they're dumbed up. That's the best thing I can say it. So I'm glad Trump has gotten to the point where he's going away from Common Core and not allowing, because Obama wanted Washington to run the educational system, thought that they were better, they knew better than the local teachers on the local level how to run our schools and teach our kids. You also have religion. If you remove religion and the belief of God from the people and from the government, well, Congress wanted to take God out of God, in God we trust, out of documents. And they also were allowing religion to be taken out of schools, Christian religion in a lot of schools, but they were bringing the religion of peace in, trying to supplement that. Okay. they were stopping seeing the Pledge of Allegiance. So there's your patriotism being taken out of schools. So Obama did all these things, and he was gearing up for one big major event. And I know a lot of people don't like to hear this, but he was gearing up for martial law, folks. That's right, martial law. And I'm going to run it all down for you. And one of the reasons why he was going to declare martial law, because he had tried several times to repeal the 22nd Amendment, which limits presidents to two terms. Sorry about that. Limits president to 2 terms. And he signed an executive order giving him the authority over, now hear this, food, livestock, water, plants, energy, health resources, transportation, and construction materials. Basically, he wanted to control all the resources in the United States with his unconstitutional executive order that he signed. And he needed to have control of all these things to declare martial law. Now, why did he want to declare martial law? Because if he declared martial law in October of 2016 before the elections, we'd have to suspend the elections. He would stay in office. Now, who was he looking to help him carry this out? The United Nations. In Hagerstown, Maryland, a fellow went out there, did a video, and actually had a drone. And in Hagerstown, Maryland, at a compound, there were tons of United Nations vehicles parked, ready to go. Not only that, but there were people throughout the countryside that were seeing United Nations vehicles being transported throughout the United States. Now, I know in Virginia, there was a place where they used to build United Nations vehicles. But just because they build them there and they would be seen transporting them to have them shipped off, there's no need for having United Nations over in Hagerstown, Maryland, right outside D.C., okay, just a few miles from D.C., and United Nations vehicles all throughout the countryside of the United States. Not only did he have that going on, he also was having strategic military vehicles being put in strategic locations. There was a lot of them seen behind some Walmarts, and we'll talk about the Walmarts in a minute, because basically what was going to happen is when he declared martial law, he was going to have the UN troops come in. They were going to supersede the U.S. troops, and the U.S. troops would then be under the United Nations troops. Okay? And with the United Nations arms agreement, that was going to allow him to go around and have the authority to take away your weapons. Therefore, you would not be able to fight back on his martial law. If you don't think the United Nations doesn't have a presence here in Utah, just a few months ago, the United Nations went and had a venue out there in Salt Lake City. They were paid by the Salt Lake City Council $500,000 to be there. And a reporter went in and started videotaping, and a United Nations security officer came out and said, "You don't have the right to videotape my face or anything else that's going on here, because this is not the United States. This is temporarily the property of the United Nations, and the United Nations is not giving you the right to film us in the United States." I mean, these people have that's just that they come in, take over a venue, and then say, "Oh no, your laws don't apply to us." And that was just recent. Okay, that wasn't years back when Obama was president. That was just recent. So the United Nations has a major presence here. And one of my links that I have out there, if I can get them all in, I only have so much room. there's a map that shows about 60 or 70 different places where the United Nations has headquarters or had headquarters of some sort or some type of office or building throughout the United States. So during the martial law, they had to have the ability to put people somewhere, and they had to have the ability to arrest these people. Well, if the prolonged detention law had been gone through, then they could have gone out and arrested people for anything and put them into FEMA camps, which were closed down Walmarts. And there are a ton of them. And there's a ton of videos. If they haven't scrubbed them off the internet, I found a few. There's still a couple I was looking for that I couldn't find. But they are using Walmarts as these FEMA camps, and that's where they were going to put folks in. And the couple videos that I have on there are worthwhile to take a look at. And Obama's grandiose plan through Obamacare, supposedly trying to make everybody have Obamacare. There's a law in Obamacare that says you're supposed to be chipped with an RFID chip. It's in the law. They said, well, in the rough draft, it was taken out. No, it's in the law. And Chief Justice Roberts, guess what? Signed off on it. Okay. So it's in there. And, oh, by the way, at one time, but they stopped this, they had RFID scanning machines for people in Walmarts. And these RFID scanning machines were not for Walmart's inventory. Because when it first came out, they put out a ton of articles about Walmart upgrading their RFID chips for their inventory to try to cover. Didn't work. Okay. So Walmart had closed down several hundred stores in the United States. They had it on their website, but they took it down because I went out to get it to put it in here, that they had decided by 2018 that they wanted to hire over 200,000 military reservists and ex-military. Now, let's go back and think about this for a minute. You got Obama wanting to declare martial law. You got the UN all over the place. You got military vehicles all over the place. Military vehicles been seen in numerous Walmart parking lots. They even had one in a tanker that tore the road up. Then Walmart turns around and puts out that they want to hire all these ex-military people and reservists. You have to put the pieces together, and it's not always going to be spelled out for you. But there are. Jesse Ventura did an awesome video. I saw it on television several years back, and it's actually been banned off TV on FEMA camps. And in these FEMA camps, they had these plastic coffins, thousands of them. Folks, I'm just telling you, they had thousands of these coffins lined up. It's on actual television. I couldn't believe it. I'm sitting there with my mouth hanging open. He even went up to one of the facilities that had double barbed wire and locked doors on it and questioned the lady. It's a very good, it's worth a 15-minute watch. Now, when all this was taking place, Obama did something else. He wanted to cut the oil supply off. So all of a sudden, in the fall of 2016, there was a shortage of oil storage tanks in the United States. And there were tons of oil tankers off the East Coast in the Atlantic and in the Gulf of Mexico. He was holding them up out there because he wanted to control the natural resources. Basically, if you don't have gas, you can't get anywhere. You got to stay put. And that's exactly what he was going to do. He also tried to take over the Fed for the second time in 2016. And the one thing I can say good about it, good old creepy ass Joe Biden, was Joe Biden, because I heard the video. Okay, there was a video. Somebody had snuck into the meeting, and Joe Biden, they were wired up and didn't know it, and Joe Biden was really hammering Obama for trying to take over the Fed to control the money. So he wanted to control. So let's recap here. Obama had tried to get laws on the books to declare war anywhere in the world. He created these terrorists to scare people. He wanted to have a prolonged detention to be able to arrest people, to put them in jail for a crime they haven't committed as of yet. He set Obamacare up to be a disaster, to basically drain money out of people's pockets. He got millions of Americans stuck on food stamps and started putting parameters on those food stamps. Had millions of Americans in poverty. He tried to take away guns. He even signed a executive order that was unconstitutional to take guns away. And he was spending money setting up all these internment camps in Walmart. Oh, and by the way, I didn't put the link in there. I don't know if I'm sure they're still out. There's 130 some internment camps that's been built throughout the United States for re-educational purposes. Okay. So he had all these plans for his martial law because he wanted to stop the election and continue to stay president. And basically he wanted to become a dictator of this country. So after he was finished, Clinton was supposed to get in. Okay. She was supposed to come in and finish up what he had got started. Now, Clinton, one of the main things she was supposed to do was to get war started, World War III. It was either going to be with the Iranians or with the North Koreans. And it was going to be a nasty one because guess what? We had funded their nuclear weapons, funded them for their nuclear weapons. Okay. So that was the first thing that she was supposed to do. The next thing she was going to do was hit the First and Second Amendment and start tearing and shredding the Constitution. And she was going to repeal the Second Amendment and ban gun sales. Okay, that's what her goal was. And it was going to be done through the UN Arms Treaty that Trump just got rid of. She was going to close military bases down worldwide so we wouldn't have a military presence in the world and we could easily be dictated to as far as other world governments because we wouldn't have been able to defend ourselves. I talked about the $2 trillion Trump has just put back into the military. She was going to censor the news. Obviously, she wants open borders. Didn't want the wall. They don't want the wall because they want all these voters to come in. And along with that, they're making money off the drugs and the sex trafficking that's coming through. And basically, she wanted to kill the economy even more than what Obama had done to starve and enslave the public. And they wanted to remove the electoral college, install popular votes to California and New York, and all the illegals could vote and keep her in because, folks, Trump did not win the popular vote. Clinton had him for about 5 million. Well, it's kind of funny. I sent Trump some tweets right after he was elected. Then the only thing I can say is then not too long after that, Vice President Pence started looking into voter fraud. Okay. We'll leave it at that. But out of the 15 states that had the most reported illegals, and you know it was more than that, it was 5 million of them. She won 9 of those states. Within 200,000 votes of that 5 million that she won the popular vote for. So if you took out 5 million illegals out of those 15 states, she wouldn't have won the popular vote. Not counting all the dead people that voted. All the millions of dead people and folks who had moved that was still on the register that was voting and double, because they were putting votes in for these folks in one state and the folks were living in another state if they were alive and they were voting again. So if you were putting a vote in for a Democrat and they're voting Republican, then it canceled that vote out. And if they voted Democrat in one state and then all of a sudden they voted in the state they just left for Democrat, and then now the Democrats got 2 votes. That's just how it works, folks. And finally, Clinton wanted to end military funding. So this was their grandiose 16-year plan to take down of America. And a lot of things had happened beforehand to get us up to this point, but this was their part in the 16-year plan of taking down America. They had a big plan, and when Trump came in, he threw a monkey wrench in their whole plan, and he's taking it all down. He's shutting them all off. Well, folks, that's all I have for today. If you would, support my channel by at least subscribing and turn on your notification buttons so you'll get notified when my next podcast comes out, my next YouTube video podcast comes out. If you would share and like, I would greatly appreciate it. I have a GoFundMe page and a Patreon. My Patreon link has been broken or not working very well. I got to get that on. I would appreciate the support if at all possible. This has been the Will Kanishi Show, featuring yours truly, Will Kanishi, in the search for truth and justice.
Everybody shout! Shout it out loud! Everybody shout!
Please subscribe to our backup channels, Net4Truth USA 2 Patriot channel, BitChute.com/net4Truth USA, and drop.space/@Net4Truth USA. We fly so close to the target, we are on our 5th fighter jet. We will be relentless and persistent until the enemies of freedom are defeated. You can support this channel by using the links in the description, but for a $100 donation, I will personally send you a autographed hardcover special edition copy of Land of Childhood's Fears. Also, visit my bookstore at lulu.com/Net4Truth USA. If you are viewing this video on BitChute, you can use the links in the description to support us, or simply click the green $ dot on our video to support this channel. Thank you. Links are in the description section.